The Angry Marks Podcast Network is brought to you by WrestleWork, a social network to connect, create, and share everything about pro wrestling. Check it out today at WrestleWork.com.
You're listening to Thursday Night AMP on the Angry Marks Podcast Network.
First, let me introduce my co-host. My name is Stevie J, and my partner in crime is Jordan Garber, and he will introduce our special guest for Hour 1.
Well, first off, how are you doing tonight, Stevie?
I'm doing great because we've got a big show, and we've got a Royal Rumble and Ring of Honor, and so much to talk about with two guests on top of that, so it's going to be a packed night.
We got a big show tonight, and everyone listening, thank you again for listening, and of course keeping up to date with the name Jordan Garber, and of course AngryMarks.com. Tonight's first guest is no stranger to Winnipeg wrestling, a personal friend of mine. His name is Mike Davidson. He is best known for formerly running WFX Wrestling. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm fantastic. I appreciate the two of you for letting me come on the show tonight.
Our pleasure.
So pretty much, like I said, you are no stranger to Winnipeg wrestling, and obviously everyone who is in the wrestling business has a story about how they got into it. How did it go for you? How did you get involved in the wrestling business?
Believe it or not, I was a little younger than you are now. I was a teenager in high school, and my cousin is Vance, Nevada. And in 1993, Vance, Nevada got involved in Winnipeg wrestling with River City Wrestling, run by Wayne Stanton. So I wanted in pretty bad, and by 1995, that summer off of high school, I convinced him to let me start training and to start setting up the ring and to start refereeing shows. And actually it was Vance and Robbie Royce that really sort of guided me. And I started training in very late June of 1995. And by August 3rd, I debuted as a referee. And that was how I got in. It was River City Wrestling. And it was a great opportunity being 16, because Vance had enough influence that I didn't really get ribbed much. And like everyone kind of gave me a shot because I was a kid. And oftentimes kids don't get a lot of respect, and I was a little bit mouthy. So, it's a good thing I had the sort of the protection and the guidance from Royce and Nevada, definitely.
And like I said, you and me, we're no strangers to what happened in Winnipeg wrestling and its history for sure. So it's really good that we both can relate to that in some way pretty much. So like you said, River City Wrestling back in the day too, there was some controversies about it. There's some good things about it, and there are some bad things about it. There's tons of stories that I've heard about personally about Wayne and River City Wrestling, as well as the fact that you are also a cousin of Vance, Nevada. Am I correct?
Yeah, cousin. Giving credit where credit is due, from 1993 when they started until about 1996, January 1996, River City Wrestling gave guys an opportunity to wrestle every 2 weeks. And it was I think a pretty legitimate operation, and it was an amazing place to break in. So giving credit where credit is due, at that time, River City Wrestling was respectable. Definitely.
All right. So pretty much, I'll ask a few questions, then we will go to Stevie as he will ask a few questions as well, and I'll go back and forth throughout the interview. Let me, kick it off pretty much. WFX Wrestling. Normally someone starts a wrestling promotion, and it's just a small little wrestling promotion at first. But you went the extra mile, and you've had excellent production value with the product. It's continued to grow, and you've grown big names. Pretty much, how did WFX come about pretty much? Okay,
so WFX, the thing is, it wasn't necessarily just my vision. The owner was a guy by the name of Jeff Dick. And Jeff Dick hired me and said, I want this to be a marketing arm for a company that I run. I want you to get wrestling fans involved or interested in my other company. So he hired me, paid me a salary, and I had a simple mandate: get on TV, and this has to have a big time approach to it. So as opposed to what independent wrestling might be in most local places, we were told, go big, go secure the best talent, make sure it's lit professionally, make sure the sound is amazing, and make it an experience. And in 2007, right after the Chris Benoit situation, where the tragedy, I was told, okay, this fall we're starting, and we had to think of a name, and we had to think of a concept. And I was worried that the industry was going to be so black-eyed by what happened with Benoit and his wife and his son that people, especially parents, would turn off the product. So I decided that we would name it Wrestling Fan Experience. And it would be all about, if you came to a show, from the 3 hours that you invested in whatever you paid for a ticket, that we gave you something that WWE didn't necessarily give you and that you couldn't get at a local independent show. So we went with an approach that fans were going to see different things, and it was going to be more interactive, and that there was going to be a lot more talent, and they were going to have access to the talent. And that was the goal. And I think we did pretty good with it. We had after parties, and then that was in 2007. Then in 2010, the same Jeff Dick secured access to a TV studio. And he said, okay, we're going to go even bigger. And so the goal was to produce a weekly television series, and we produced the first taping. And Chad Sokolovich out of Michigan sent the first couple of episodes to a couple of broadcasters in the U.S., America One being the biggest one, and they liked it. They ordered weekly episodes. So we were in the position to have a carrier that had great penetration in the U.S., and that's how it came to be.
And then you just started right to the whole concept of like television production and film production, something that I used to have involvement in back in high school. And I have a feeling, I think you worked with my vocational teacher who helped you with the TV tapings. Just tell us pretty much how you got involved with TV tapings and how you got that started, and how you did a good job at that.
Okay. You're speaking of Ken Platink, who was my roommate when I worked at a TV station in a small city in Canada, Brandon, Manitoba. And so I was a TV sports anchor, and Ken was too. So we became very good friends. In 2005, with a different company called AWE, we decided we were going to try to do pay-per-view specials. So we got an amazing venue at the University of Manitoba called the Investors Group Athletic Center, and we went big. I think our first show had Billy Gunn and Rikishi and Jamie Noble, and Hacksaw Duggan was on the first show, and we produced 2 pay-per-view specials that actually broadcast in Canada on pay-per-view. And if I'm not mistaken, I think we're probably the first group to produce our own show specifically for pay-per-view in Canada. And that probably, in a lot of ways, made us as big as, say, Scott D'Amore's Border City Wrestling, and probably Scott's company and our company were probably the 2 biggest since Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling. So that was quite an accomplishment. And a lot of that credit goes to the vision that Jeff Dick had, because Jeff Dick said, if I'm going to get behind this and I'm going to invest money in this, you better go big. And you better go big or you better go home. And in our case, we went big and then we went home. So that's how it went.
And then you had WFX, and it was a huge product. It was growing throughout the country, and then unfortunately it folded. But what I've seen lately is I've seen these AWE Overloads, which you been promoting a lot, and I've always heard this thing called Bring It Back, Bring WFX Back. What is all the work that has been giving into bringing this product back? What is the likelihood of us seeing another WFX event?
And that's a good question. Right now, what we're doing is we released all the episodes of WFX Overload onto YouTube. And every week we put up a new one. Right now we're on episode 2, and then episode 3 will go up. And the YouTube channel is WFX Overload. So if you go to YouTube and you search WFX Overload, our channel will come up, and we hope people will subscribe to it. And they'll get an idea of what the quality was. And we had, you talk about the first match in Overload history, it was Kushida versus Mentolo, and we had Eugene Dinsmore, and we had Johnny Fairplay, and we had Bushwhacker Luke, and we had Billy Gunn, we had Michael Elgin before he had ever made it to Ring of Honor. We had Rick Victor before he made it to WWE. We had Emma, who's Tennille Taylor, before she made it to WWE. So we had all these people who we put together a team of people that either went back to WWE, or in Jesse Godder's case, went to TNA. We had him probably 7 matches into his career. And the episodic television, which was written originally by Liam Phillips, and then I took over writing television, was put together very well. Bob Hawley, Hardcore Hawley, Hurricane Helms, basically the best of the best in the industry, Charlie Haas, were all brought in to be a part of this weekly TV show. And our goal, we knew we were never going to be WWE, because that's nearly impossible, right? It's going to take a lot of magic for someone to ever get mentioned in the same breath as WWE. And for that matter, TNA, we couldn't spend to their degree, but we wanted to be in that same conversation. Top 5 in North America was really our goal. And that's what people will see when they go to the WFX Overload YouTube channel. And they can follow us on Twitter at WFX Wrestling, and they can they can go to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/WFX Wrestling, and they can sort of see the pictures and everything. Now, you asked a question about the hashtag Bring It Back, and that's something I have constant communication with people, and it's new people. It's not people who've been involved in the old product, but there are people who were involved in the old product who support this, who say, what would it take to happen? And I'm very honest. I put together a plan, and I've talked to, some incredible people in the industry. And I had the benefit of working with Bushwhacker Luke in the last WFX, and his wisdom and all the territories he worked in for 30 years. And so what we've done is we've put together a plan. Now, somebody said, I'll believe it when I see it. And you know what is amazing? I look at that and I see it as a challenge, because believe it when you see it. If they knew half of what would go into something that is a vision this grand, they should have nothing but a lot of respect for it, because it's ballsy, it's gutsy, it's brave, it's all those words that describe a true challenge. But let me tell you something. At this stage of my life, 35 years old, if I'm going to do something, I want it to be bigger and better than anything I've ever been a part of. And that means it's got to be better than it was in 2010. So for us to do that, you could see what went into the product in 2010. That's the type of energy that's behind it right now. And we've secured a couple of sponsors, and we've got some communication going on with a broadcaster. And there's actually an agency involved that's willing to help us shop this concept. But I believe, in all honesty, that if I was to put a percentage chance on it, I'd say 65, 70% chance that WFX will come back. The question is, everyone's going to say, oh, well, could Winnipeg handle this? And let's be very honest. No. The Canadian dollar is 80 cents right now, okay? This product can't look at Winnipeg and say that's the be-all and end-all. So it's got to look at where it can create the infrastructure to do something like this and to grow from that infrastructure. And so it might not be in Winnipeg. It might be in an American city. I happen to be in a position to get an American visa so that I can work on both sides of the border. And I know a few others can do that. So I would bet it's quite likely going to be a North American product with a presence in Canada and a presence in the U.S. And I think it could happen. I think it's closer now than ever, personally.
And before I bring it to Stevie to ask a few questions, that if bringing WFX, it's good that you sorry about a cold, but bringing it back to a North American audience instead of a local standpoint will be better, because if you just bring it back to Winnipeg, you know how much politics and crap you're going to deal with once that comes up, right?
To be honest, I'm not at all worried or alarmed by politics. Let me say this. It was named Wrestling Fan Experience because it was supposed to be a product that fans could get behind. So when I hear fans say, oh, seen it before, been there, done that, they don't realize what actually inspires us. It has nothing to do, a lot of people have the mistaken opinion, oh, Mike Davidson and his ego. And that's not true. You'll never see me put myself in a match, put myself over. You'll never see me in an angle, basically jobbing out a guy in order for me as a booker to validate myself. This was strictly about, okay, we have an opportunity to put this together, let's do it. We wrote this because the fans will get behind it. We did more for undiscovered talent than probably any other company. I could name 5 guys that went from our product to WWE or TNA or Ring of Honor. I can name guys that were in WWE that got a second life based on what we did. So that had nothing to do with us. That had something to do, and you'll see it in the episodes, the way the fans responded to certain talent. Charlie Haas debuts in episode 4, and you'll be amazed at the reaction Winnipeg gave him for his debut. Bob Hawley debuts, I believe, in episode 7 or 8, and he gets an overwhelming response. Sabu was brought in, and he gets an incredible response. Gangrel and the Brotherhood, which was Kevin Thorne and Rick Victor, who's then known as APOC. We never ever thought about ourselves. We put together a product that we believed fans would get behind. So I love it when a fan says, been there, done that. and then goes to local shows or so many independent shows, which are flawed by one thing: a guy that's going to put himself over ahead of what the fans want. That happens too many times. It didn't happen with our product. So the challenge of, I'll believe it when I see it, or been there, done that. Hey, keep saying it, because I think it fuels the fire, and it pushes the people that want to bring it back to push harder. And that's certainly what we're at.
Stevie, back to you. I'll let you ask a few questions for Mike.
All right, Mike, my first question is, earlier in the conversation you said WFX went big and then it went home. So what I want to know, and what I think our listeners want to know, is what caused it to go home? Is it the politics that Jordan keeps talking about? Was it money? Was it talent leaving to go to WWE, TNA, Ring of Honor, as you said? What caused it to go home?
That's a great question. I'll be very honest with you. The person who was the financial benefactor of the company, he got into a taxation issue with the Canadian Revenue Agency, and that froze a large portion of his assets. And the reality was, I remember, I believe it was in August of 2010, he sat us down and said, it's going to be a bumpy ride here, but I'm committed to keep trying. And he did keep trying, and he did his best. But unfortunately, as a single financial backer, TNA has been in that position 5-10 times, where they had to keep going back to the Panda Energy and say, look, we have no more. We've missed payroll. We can't keep going. And luckily their financial benefactor continued to put money in. In my situation, which I was hired by the financial benefactor, wasn't me selling him to keep going. He was very straightforward. And in fairness to that person, Jeff Dick, I think he's done more for Canadian wrestling, definitely for Winnipeg wrestling, than any other person. He's put more behind it. He's put all of us on a bigger stage than we've ever been. And for that, I shake his hand and have nothing but the kindest words for him. And if it hadn't been for him, there wouldn't have been a WFX. So that was really what it came down to, was, he ran into some problems with the tax man. And when they froze his assets, albeit temporarily, it certainly hurt us.
Now, was there money coming in from the America One deal as well, or was that a broadcast deal where it was just a handshake, like you provide the product and we'll air it?
It was a combination of both, actually, because we had a multitude of different carriers. We were on something called At Sports TV. We were on America One. We were on several different carriers. And in some cases, it was like a syndicated deal where they pay a rights fee to run Nash, or they pay a rights fee to run Judge Judy. We got a little bit of that. America One, I don't remember the specifics of that particular deal. I think that one was a handshake deal. So there was a little bit of revenue, but to be honest, I'll be very, very forthright. It was costing us about $10,000 per episode, pretty close, maybe, somewhere in there. I don't think we were generating $10,000 in revenue. Now, that being said, in the current plan, when I talk to people about getting involved with this and people talk to me about expanding on this, the reality is, I think any wrestling company has to have a 5-year plan, and they're not going to be in the black in year one. I don't think Ring of Honor was in the black the first year Sinclair ran it. I know TNA hasn't been in the black. They maybe had 1 year out of 12 or 13 or 14 in the black. WWE is the only wrestling company in North America that operates in the black. So I think the key is right now is to create a product that in year one can really capture the imagination of wrestling fans and get wrestling fans really motivated, inspired, and dedicated to the product. And then from there, in year two, grow your market share a little bit more. And then in year three, start to monetize what your investment has been. Guess what? In any business, when you're going big, your first year, you're going to have a lot of money you have to put out. And in year two, you're probably not going to hit that point where you're in the black. But if you believe in your product, and if the marketplace and your customers believe in your product and get behind it, and they know that what they're buying is actually getting you closer to the black, and you're reinvesting in your product, I think the people will actually take a level of ownership and get motivated and get really dedicated behind you. And passionate fans, and Winnipeg, we're lucky. We see it in 3 different platforms of pro sports. We have very dedicated, passionate fans. I think North American wrestling fans are I think they're the most passionate, and I think they're the most loyal fans of any sports genre, because their business gets shit on all the time. they get laughed at for being a wrestling fan. They get dismissed because it's not a legitimate sport. It's not what critics will call real entertainment. So they're it's like bastard children. Nobody wants to really pat them on the back. But I believe that they will get behind something and they will put their heart and soul behind it. And I think that will have a very positive effect on the overall vision for any group that's going to make it in wrestling.
Well, now you mentioned the local sports in Winnipeg, and that's one of the things I was going to ask actually was if that had an effect on WFX and the houses they drew was having to compete with the local sports franchises.
No, we were very fortunate. It was before the NHL came back. We were actually drawing pretty good, but to keep up with creating new episodes of TV, and we would only shoot from one studio, similar to what TNA was doing at the time. We had to run every third Friday. So the unfortunate part of that is fans can get burned out on the product because, I can miss this one. I'll go to the next one, right? Especially Friday night when you start getting into the summer in Manitoba, where you only get 4 months of really nice weather. Try to get them out on a Friday night when they can go to the cottage or they can go and do something outside, right? So that's a challenge for us, but I don't think that the local sports organizations really hurt us actually. I think we were creating a niche in the marketplace, and I think they were getting behind it. I think the problem was strictly that the financial resources weren't there when we needed them there, because our growth spurt was going to happen in fall and winter in Manitoba, where there's not much you can do outside, so you have to go indoors. Movie theaters do better in Manitoba in the fall, in the winter, in the spring than they do in the summer. And we kind of peaked in August, unfortunately, because of the financial resources. The goal was always hit big in the third quarter and the fourth quarter of 2010, and then ride a wave that would have driven you into a huge expansion in the summer of 2011. It just didn't happen. I wish it did. And you know what? A lot of people point at me and say, well, Mike Davidson blew all the money. Believe me, I wouldn't be in the position I've been in for the last 12 years working for somebody if I blew all his money carelessly and he was dissatisfied with the productivity. Never been a case of, it's funny, I've heard it before where, people in the local business say, if I had the opportunity, if I had the so-called mark money that Davidson had, wow, would we be further? No, you wouldn't have, because you wouldn't have known who to push. You wouldn't have brought Michael Elgin in and pushed him as a top heel. You wouldn't have realized what you had, that you had the resources to go out and find an independent talent from a different territory, because the ego would have gotten in the way that you would have said, local guy, and I'm not going to paint a picture and say, well, this guy isn't as good, but they would have thought, these Winnipeg wrestlers are just as good. And that's not how we recruited. We had Winnipeg wrestlers, but we knew we could recruit from anywhere in North America, and we certainly did. And you'll see it in the product at WFX Overload. And that's not a slight on Winnipeg wrestlers, because I'll tell you this. Kenny Omega may not like me, but he is definitely the most talented guy that ever came out of Winnipeg. And I'll say that bar none. I'm glad I get to say it on the record. Kevin Chevy may not like me, but I pushed him to the moon, and he is a very, very, very talented wrestler who probably doesn't get the respect he deserves. And the list goes on and on and on that I'll say that about, So if there's anybody who says, I'm being negative to Winnipeg wrestlers, I'm not. I'm saying that anybody that's ever said, if I had the money Davidson had, I would have done so much more. The reality is I don't believe they would. And I'm not stopping them from going and finding the money and doing what I did or doing better. Go find it. And if you can't, eventually you got to shut up, because you have to put up or shut up, right? I've been put in the position several times to put up. And that's why I'm here talking tonight. I don't have to shut up. I can speak. My legacy will speak louder than my words will.
Well, you've got an open mic here on Angry Marks Podcast Network, so you can definitely say anything you want.
You had to say the word Angry Mark right after I said that. I sound like an angry Mark.
That's what
I wanted to ask you, though, because I got to look at Jordan's cheat sheet before the show tonight, and one of the questions on there was, do you have heat with Danny Dugan? And you already talked about people not liking you, so I have to ask that one before I go back to Jordan.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that question. I love Danny. Danny and I, we are a laugh a minute. I don't know if he has heat with me. I don't think he does. We communicate regularly. I have a lot of respect. And you know what? CWE just had, I believe, their 6th anniversary show. sellout with Scott Steiner. There's not much negative I'll say, although people are going to say, oh, well, he talked about a booker pushing himself and they're going to point to Danny. That's not the case because Danny's talent speaks for itself. I think the CWE vision and the WFX vision completely different. And part of what I want to see happen with WFX is it to exist and not be a Winnipeg wrestling company. And I don't think that CWE is a Winnipeg wrestling company, to be honest. I think it's a Manitoba wrestling company. And they even run into Saskatchewan. So I have no grief with him at all. I'm proud of him in a lot of ways. I've known him since, he broke into the business, I think, at 14. Every year he's gotten better. And at his age now, I think he's knocking on 30. I wonder when that's going to plateau because I think he's better today than he was 5 years ago. So, I've got nothing but very kind things to say about Danny.